The thing that really kind of surprises me is because of my business. I mean, I'm seeing Hispanic I would say middle class Hispanic guys, really first generation, businessmen, small businessmen. I talked to some of them. They're Trump. And
Yeah.
I'm not sensing, my point is, I'm not sensing much enthusiasm for her at all.
But even more so, I mean, one of the things, besides I write books and do some commentary, that's not what pays the bills. I do American Majority to C3 and then American Majority Action. And what we're doing right now, I think there's some fundamentals that have changed considerably since 2020 for Trump that simply weren't there. First of all, a commitment to actually do an absentee ballot chase and early voting push, generating more ballots among mid to low propensity voters. And I do think you're seeing a shift in some of these demographics as they have watched this disaster of 4 years. So I think there's a lot of different things that I'm seeing as we're involved in these efforts in Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, North Carolina. The numbers are really good for Trump on a fundamental level. I love a good poll number because I'm a political nerd. They're kind of like weather forecasts. They might or might not be true a week or two from now. But the fundamental numbers, I think, is what people should be looking at, is how big are the ballot universes in a given state, and what is the partisan registration advantage? And then also, has there been a diminishment in some of these demographics that have been typically for the other side? And I think you're seeing all of that across the board in the 7 key states that I think are going to decide this White House. So I'm quietly optimistic that we'll have a chance. I'm a believer that politics is policy. So this kind of tying into my whole administrative state reform, all of that. You have to actually win politically to have policy reform, to have governmental reform. But unless you win politically, all you're doing is having great conversations. I think he's got a legitimate shot. Trump does right now. What are we, 6 weeks out, to actually be in the right place to implement these reforms? But I'm not letting up. People are crowing over the Quinnipiac poll. I think it's about a 13-point difference between where Biden was and Harris is today. And I'm like, that's great. Do not let up for a second, because we do not have – losing is not an option for the future of this country.
I really my thing is that I'm seeing, you're like, what really struck me was in 2020, of course there was COVID going on a little bit, you know what I'm saying, COVID was there.
Right.
But in 2020, my son told me at Purdue, he and a friend were the only two that were going to say, we're for Trump, you know what I'm saying? And he said,
right.
He wasn't even there. I was at Purdue recently, and there was like a college Republican meeting, and they were packed. And, and I think that's coming up. But I think the real reason is, as you say, I'm very encouraged to see things going on in Arizona and things in Nevada. Really,
so just to give people perspective, last I checked, Republicans are up about 75,000 ballots on the permanent absentee ballot list in Arizona over Democrats, which is a very encouraging sign, and almost 300,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats in Arizona. These are the fundamental numbers I'm talking about that I think should give us, the numbers are there. Can we take advantage of them? That's why I put in ballot generation, ballot chase teams to not only chase the ballots, but then when early voting starts in Arizona, the ballots drop and early voting starts on October 9th. If you don't have a ballot, go vote early in person on day one. Save Trump money, save me money, and let's get the vote. And if Trump can be in the lead or close to the lead on AB, EV, you start a narrative, because Republicans traditionally win definitively on Election Day. But if he's closer in the lead on AB, EV, you begin a narrative in which people start to realize, oh my gosh, he can actually win. And it becomes this psychological advantage as well of people going, he's on his way to winning, and then on Election Day, seal the deal.
Mm-hmm.
That to me that's one of the dynamics that I think is very different this time around than 2020. I do not think after the 2022 midterms, I had an epiphany. Sadly, it was a couple days afterwards. I wish I'd had it before. Nobody was doing this in a concerted way like the Florida GOP. They weren't doing AB generation. They weren't doing AB chase. They weren't doing early voting in these key states. We better figure this out for 2024. So that's a dynamic that is very different for us now than it was in 2020. And the other thing, too, think about all the censorship that took place in 2020 because Elon Musk didn't have Twitter, now X. They can't they cannot control the narrative like they did in 2020, whether it was the Hunter Biden laptop that you mentioned, Christian, or, the 51, intelligence officials that say it's Russian disinformation. Elon Musk owning X coming into 2024 is, I think, a major dynamic that not enough people have discussed in regards to controlling the narrative on the elections, on Trump, on what's actually taking place. So there's a lot of different dynamics that I think are very different this time around that I don't think people have really thought through. They've been focused on the polls, but the fundamentals are completely different.